Good morning, everyone. This is Ameya from Rio. IFA Congress began yesterday with two fundamental critical topics being discussed, BEPS, and the second topic was on the fragmentation of the contracts in the context of PE. Both issues deal with several fundamental issues relating to the international taxation. And to discuss some of the nuances, I'm joined by Ms. Liselott Kana, who's from the Chilean Revenue Administration. Thank you so much for speaking to TaxSutra. Yesterday's panel ended on a discussion that BEPS did not discuss the source versus residence conflict. That was not part of the scope, rightly so. And now there is a discussion, sort of very active discussion on relooking at some of these concepts which have been prevalent for last 80, 90 years. How do you think this debate will pan out if you were to do some crystal ball gazing for the next few years?
Well, thank you very much, Anish. I think, as you correctly said, the BEPS project did not go into the discussion of source and residence, and that was the first step. And I think because of the incorporation in the inclusive framework, the way that the OECD with G20 has now changed its, because of the economic, the international economic markets and the size of the markets, you do really need to get to an international consensus. So therefore, I think, the view from the OECD G20 is that you have to incorporate most countries as much as possible. And therefore, of course, the views will be different. And there will be another discussion, as you rightly said, that will open up for a new discussion on what is the correct balance between source and residence.
Right. You have been also a very active member at the United Nations Tax Committee. Of course, on UN too has been sort of supportive of the BEPS project in many ways. But on this fundamental source versus residence principle, what is the view among the members? I understand it will be an informal view,
yes,
of course, and perhaps personal opinions. But what's sort of a mood among the members at UN?
Well, the UN committee is a very flexible organism, and it will change, and this year it will change radically because there are 21 new members. It's very difficult to see where it will go, but where we did make sure that the BEPS for the OECD G20 was one issue, and BEPS for the UN could have been other things as well, including services. So we didn't close our mind to just incorporate what the OECD G20 project was. We actually said that BEPS might be something a little bit bigger and different for developing countries. So that was actually something that was taken into account already. But the UN committee has a lot less resources, and of course it was having to take advantage of what was done at the OECD G20 and probably build on from there. We'll have to see what they want to do now. Sure.
Yeah. Yesterday on your panel on the fragmentation of contract and the revised PE-related rules that have been introduced as a part of the BEPS, one trend was, of course, the changes that have been made to the preparatory and auxiliary services definition. The other aspect that was discussed was very interesting, is this diverted profit tax version, which has been introduced by UK, New Zealand and Australia in some variations, but essentially looking at taxing in a source country by creating a deemed permanent establishment. Do you think perhaps that's an answer to the source versus, or the answer is there that countries are increasingly looking at source-based taxation through deemed PE? Will that be again a trend that you will observe in the coming?
Yes, it's interesting. It's an interesting time we live in, because I do think that the PE concept, and I think the seminar, the conference we had yesterday on that topic, just shows how difficult the concept is being. It's getting really difficult to understand it. I was saying to some of my colleagues yesterday, in fact, in order to have a consensus on how we understand it, I have 3 doctorates on the issue. So if I negotiate the tax treaty with a counterpart, shall I ask them to read that doctorate and say, I agree with that, so we are in consensus of how we in our bilateral relations should understand the PE concept? It's just getting too difficult. And I think it's getting too much tensions on it. People criticize this because we're trying to sort of make it updated, but it's getting more complicated, so people don't like it's getting complicated. But the thing is, it is complicated in today's economy, and I think the tension on it is high, and I think the responses, or the unilateral responses from the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and India, in a certain sense, with the equalization levy, I think it's a trend that I think probably other countries will look into it and see, in the way we go forward with the digital economy action one, probably some of that input will go into that work.
Right. This brings to my last question, and there are 2 or 3 components to it. Essentially, Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan yesterday mentioned that the market, where the MNCs are accessing the market, the remuneration based on function asset risk analysis is not enough, and even the market factors have to be adequately considered.
Yeah.
I'm just taking another comment which Mr. Pascal Saint-Amans meant. He referred to European schizophrenia in the context of, for example, he was referring to a Google case where, on one hand, you try to say that there is no, European MNCs, when they are being taxed abroad, you say that market, it should be residence-based taxation, but when it comes to your own countries, perhaps the view is different. How do you see this trend on compensating based on the market emerging? We heard China say that, now India too is saying, yeah.
Yeah, I think it will be part of the international solution, and I think the good thing with the BEPS project is that it has created this inclusive framework, and that means that there is a larger group that they are discussing, and I think that is vital because at present I think the transfer pricing issues are going in opposite direction. The solutions are not converging, and I think that is going to be even more difficult in the future. I'm not saying there will be a solution, but I think that just the discussion is good, and if people can come up with good solutions, we're all going to be better off.
Thank you so much.